membership. And if you'll notice from the PowerPoint, we are using a little bit of different branding and some different things that way for today. So welcome. And today I want to talk about something that I've actually been working on for the last 9 or 10 months and finally felt comfortable bringing this to the masses in the form of a webinar. And so my hope here is to introduce one thing that we do here at New Work Revolution. Now, it's not everything that we do, but it's one thing that we do to really help a leader with the team building process. And this is something that we do that's called talent optimization through a company that we partner with called the Predictive Index. And so as I was talking with the Predictive Index folks recently, I was asking them about, hey, do you have some built-in presentations, things that you do that I could, look off of or utilize to introduce the concept of talent optimization to the people that we work with? And when I say talent optimization, I'm really talking about just team building, hiring, developing teams, those kinds of things. And so they said, yeah, we have this thing that we, kind of a out of the box type thing. But he's like, we have one of the topics already built out into a presentation. So I look at the slideshow and I'm like, man, if you really want to get into a sense of feeling like you're not special, just look at a guide that basically maps out your entire leadership career at its early stages in a PowerPoint. So I was like, man, I really must not be that special, because this problem that you've illustrated in this PowerPoint, this is the exact problem that I ran into early on in my career with regards to team building. And so today I'm going to talk about 3 things every leader must know to lead effectively today. And I'll tell you what, this is something that I wish was called 3 things every leader should have known like 25 years ago. And that would have made me feel a hell of a lot better about what I was doing from a leadership standpoint. And so, for those of you guys who are, maybe familiar with this or maybe not familiar with this, my journey is pretty similar to the journey that exists in in the leadership, in this kind of leadership paradigm. And so, I started out as, someone who got his first leadership assignment at the tender age of 25. And like a lot of people in this realm, I was under the impression that there were just a lot of things that I knew about leadership and management. And going through that process, what I realized is there really wasn't a lot of things that I did know about leadership and management. And so I kind of had to figure those things out as I went. And one of probably the toughest things that I went through was really learning and understanding myself first and foremost, and then really figuring out how that translated into building a team, and really how to recognize what people on a team that I needed to know. And so that was kind of my story. So a lot of things I'm going to talk about are things that I feel like I have personally experienced and been through in my own leadership story. And as you guys know, navigating leadership is not easy. I mean, there are, to get to the top of the mountain, so to speak, I mean, there's a lot of things that happen over the course of your journey. And, I love this illustration here because it really speaks to, it gets off kind of slow. And then look, as you start to kind of find your footing, you notice that you start to ascend that leadership mountain a lot quicker the more that you get comfortable with things, and the more you have tools and systems and understanding in order to do that. And so when we think about the world of work, there's 4 quadrants that we break teams up into. And you've got teamwork, and those are, and teamwork are people who are all about morale, engagement, cultivation, those kinds of things, right? Oprah Winfrey is someone that they use as an example of, someone who's teamwork oriented. Now, innovation, which happens to be the quadrant that I operate out of, these are people who break new ground. They are, challenging the status quo. They're testing new ideas, products. They're always trying to, put something new out there, right? Like an Elon Musk would be an innovative type of person. Then you've got down in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got a process-oriented person. This is about systems and operations that allow a business to run and scale. Now, the interesting thing here is they talked about Steve Jobs being a very process-oriented person, which kind of surprised me because I would think he was more of an innovative person. But process-oriented people are people who are looking for systems and processes and operations that allow, again, the business to run and scale. And then you've got the results in the bottom right corner. And results-oriented people are people who hold people accountable. They're driving for market share or return on investment. And, I really thought that was really interesting, right? And so not only when I went through this did I think I knew my team, but what I realized is what I knew about my team was actually not quite accurate. Like I was missing certain things. And I'm going to go over some examples of kind of how I missed this. But in the predictive index, they've broken teams up into 4 different categories of individual that you're going to have on your team. And we'll kind of get into this more specifically. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to know and understand and kind of identify, well, who am I as a leader? Like what, who am I in this process? How do I lead? What are my strengths? What are my blind spots? How do I navigate me? And I love that question. How do I navigate me? Because, realistically, in the first parts of my career, what I recognized is, I was not really great at, understanding how to navigate myself in terms of, what my strengths were, my blind spots, or how do I lead. In fact, I never thought about that. And the challenge is if you're a leader who doesn't think about your own strengths, your own blind spots, your own leadership philosophy, and you've heard me talk about this philosophy in the Masters of Management program. Like if you've been through that, I know a lot of people have been through that program that I did. We ask a manager or a leader to identify, well, what is your leadership philosophy? Who do you want to be as a leader? Because there's a lot of different ways to lead. Like as we saw, in the quadrant before, there are 4 different people that they talked about: Oprah Winfrey, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs. I think the other quadrants like General Patton. And these are all people that are highly regarded as leaders. People would think about them and think of them as a really great leader in whatever way, shape, or form that they were leading. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to lead. But the key is, well, how do we identify my leadership philosophy and how I lead and what I do best as a leader, and maybe where I need some additional help as a leader? And so this is kind of where I fall in the leadership scope. So when you go through the initial assessment, the behavioral assessment, it kind of puts you in a category and it will mark you based on kind of where you're at and how you fall within that. So for me, I'm in innovation, and I might be maybe more towards the middle of this innovation pie, really. I mean, I kind of put myself a little closer to that teamwork line, because the closer you are to a line, the more you may show tendencies for 2 different areas, right? And so, if you're someone down in the 4 corner area of that, you may show some tendencies in a lot of different areas. But for most of us, we're going to fall pretty squarely in one particular area and discipline. Now, for me, it's innovation. Now, there's a lot of different personality types within innovation. Mine happens to be Maverick. And so if I think about conflict that I've had, if I think about difficulties that I've had in team settings over the years, the Maverick terminology really fits the bill. Because if you talk to other people who've worked with me in the past, maybe not as clients, but just as team members, some people would probably tell you that I'm kind of a pain in the ass to work with. I'm kind of difficult to work with. And it's because, I'm always looking at new ways to do things. And if you're a process-oriented person, which is kind of my opposite counterpart, you're the kind of person that I probably butt heads with in this process. I don't necessarily always like to stick to a process or do the same process over and over again. I mean, that gets a little boring for me, and I'm always trying to look at something new. And it was funny talking about the Strategic Business Forum workshops. I remember talking to Billy, and Billy, who I work with, and as some of you guys know, he said, look, man, you got to stop creating workshops, man. And we just need to nail down the workshops that we're currently doing. And it was totally true. At the time, I think I had like 13 or 14 workshops that I'd created. And I had these ideas for more workshops that I wanted to create. So I wasn't done creating workshops. But what he said made a lot of sense. And so we went through and we picked which ones are our favorite, which ones do people seem to like the most. And let's do those workshops, and let's just get rid of the rest of them. And so I have sidelined probably half of our workshops that in a way that I don't know that they'll ever be done again. So, that is, as an innovator, sometimes I need someone to help me in that process and go through that process. So, that's me in a nutshell from a work standpoint. So the second area that we want to look at, right? So the first thing we look at is who we are. But the second thing we want to look at is who's on my team. And again, like I told you before, early on in my leadership career, because I was so poor at self-evaluating and understanding myself, if you're a leader like that, you're likely not going to do that for your team either. So wherever I'm deficient as a leader, guess what? That's going to show up in the teams that I lead as well. So there's a few questions here that you can kind of think of. How does the team go about its work? How do they work? How do they communicate? How do they take action? What are their strengths? What are their blind spots? How do they interact together? And this kind of stuff is really important. So if you're a leader, you probably know some things about how your team interacts. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. You know how your team shows up and operates, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not so good. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you just find your team to be stuck in a certain area, it very well may be that they're lacking a certain discipline that would be really important to have on your team. But for a lot of us, we don't have a mechanism or a process for uncovering the answers to some of these questions. Now, years ago, and I think the predictive index might have existed actually early on in my leadership career, but my company certainly wasn't invested in something like that. And so I had to learn some of these things the hard way. I kind of had to figure out my own strengths and weaknesses just kind of through my own self-reflection. I had to do the same with the team by asking some questions, getting their input and feedback about those things, and then trying to kind of put together patterns around how my team operated. I didn't really have a really set process for doing this like I do now. And so if we don't understand the dynamics of the team, that's going to hold us back in a lot of ways. It's going to hold us back from being as productive as we want to be. It's going to create tensions within the team. It's going to require us to put people in positions that maybe they're not qualified to be in. So if you've ever felt like you've got a good team member, but for some reason that team member just doesn't seem to grasp what you're doing or what's happening in the organization, it very well may be that you've put that person in a role that they're not suited for. So let's take a look at just what this looks like specifically if we look at how like a breakdown would go from the behavioral assessment. So when you take the assessment, it'll tell you where you lie. But when your team takes an assessment, it's also going to tell them where they lie. Now, I put someone in teamwork here, and that actually represents Billy, who's on my team. Now, Billy's not hardcore teamwork. He's actually closer to the innovation teamwork line. What surprised me about this is I didn't know that Billy was a teamwork-oriented person. In fact, Billy has been an entrepreneur his entire life. He's never really worked in like a more formal organizational structure. And so I think based on his experience, I felt like he was an innovator just like I was. I felt like we were probably pretty close to being the same person. What I noticed about Billy is, he is a lot more teamwork oriented. And anytime that we've had some conflict, what I've noticed is it's because there's a lack of teamwork and collaboration that Billy desires that isn't necessarily my forte. And so I thought that was really interesting going through that and learning a little bit more about Billy, things that I thought I knew that I realized I just didn't really know. So that was one thing that kind of came up there for me when we went through teamwork. Now, looking at the other dynamics of the team, there's some other people on our team that I really thought that I had on my team. And so if you guys remember, I had Marie who worked for me for a long time. I swore in my head that Marie was a process-oriented person. I was like, she's got to be a process systems-oriented person. When Marie took the behavioral assessment, she was actually a results person. So I'm sitting here thinking like, oh my God, okay, this whole time, I think she's probably this process-oriented person. She's actually more of a driver. But after I saw that assessment, a lot of what I knew about Marie or how Marie showed up in a work setting totally started to make sense. I'm like, oh, that is results. That is driving, a certain result or a certain way of being. And it was really illuminating to me to really get a sense for, who really is on my team and what that looks like. Now, let's say I have another person who takes the assessment and they're also, pretty close to being an innovation just like me. And I would say like if you looked at my actual chart, Billy and I are pretty close in the innovation space, but again, he is closer to the teamwork area. So we're in the same area, a little bit different personality types. And so when you think about, some of these things, like when you think about, okay, well, what is the, tell me a little bit more about, some of these teams, right? And so if you have someone who is, a teamwork oriented person, this individual kind of helps me to keep the teamwork focus in mind. But what I may struggle with someone who's more oriented towards teamwork is they don't have the same drive that I do. So what's interesting about this breakdown is teamwork and innovation are very collaborative type, personable type personality or sections. Process and results are more about, driving results, processes, those kinds of things. Now on the teamwork process side, those people tend to be a little bit more methodical or deliberate with how they work. On innovation and results, we tend to be more driver oriented. We're always driving. So, if I have someone who's more teamwork oriented, one of the things that I may get bugged about is that they don't move fast enough with me. Same thing with a process oriented person. Now, the great thing about having a process oriented person is this person is going to be strong where I am clearly weak. I mean, this is like literally my counterpoint to how I work. So they're going to really make up a lot of deficiencies. But again, I may not appreciate the way that they process things and the way that they do things. So I've got to be mindful about the fact that these people are really helping to cover a lot of weaknesses that I have within my game. Now, if there's other people that are just like me, who are more, results oriented, look, we're going to be like two peas in a pod. But for anyone who's ever worked with someone just like them, guess what also happens? You butt heads and things don't always go the way that you want them to, because of the conflict of working with someone who thinks and behaves just like you do. So that's innovate. That's the second part of this, is knowing your teams. The first part is knowing yourself. The second part is knowing your team. The third part is, what does my team need to do? This is a really great question. Now, you may have objectives, you have goals, things like this, but work, we talk about teamwork, engagement, morale, innovation, process, systems and operations, producing, results and accountability, or you have some combination of the above. So when you look at your team, you may think, our morale's not very good. We're really innovative. We've got processes. We really drive accountability, but our morale is not great. Or maybe you're really innovative and you're always breaking new ground, but the problem is there's no systems and processes around those operations, which gets in the way of again, engagement and morale and things like that. So you can see that, when you look at what kind of team you have and what kind of team you work with, you're going to start to notice maybe areas where you're going to have some deficiencies. Now, as you go through the behavioral assessment, it's going to look something like this. So the rings are representative of the objectives or the work that you're trying to do. So typically when I go through an assessment with someone one-on-one, I'll talk with them about, well, what are your objectives that you want to accomplish through teamwork? And then we figure out what are their top 5 objectives. And then that will allow us to see kind of where this work falls, right? So you can see that we have 3 things that are in teamwork and 2 things that are in process. So most of the things that we need are actually on the opposite side of innovation and results. So if this is my team, I'm really thinking, crap, man, like all the skills I bring to the table aren't necessarily the things that we need. Now, that's probably because I'm already good at that and that already exists. So we don't need more of it. We probably need to build teams around that and systems and processes to make sure that that stuff is going smoothly. Now, as you kind of look at this, like, what does my team need to do? Now you can start to look at, what people do I have on my team? And okay, I've got someone in teamwork. Now, how can that person help me drive the teamwork objectives and the work that we want to do around that? Oh, I've got someone on my team who's process oriented. This is a person that I can lean on to help me accomplish some of those things. Now, let's say all of your, like 2 of your objectives were in results, and you don't have a results oriented person. You don't have a driver in your organization. That's going to tell you that there's a need there for hiring. So let's say you go out and you hire, you can start looking for someone who has some of the characteristics of a results-oriented person. Now, this starts to take the guesswork out of hiring a little bit when we think, gosh, you know what? Like, I just need someone to fill this role, but maybe if we need someone who thinks a certain way in that role to get the kind of results that we're looking for in this particular area. So I really love the objective nature of how this really breaks it down and says, okay, what does my team need to do? And then how does that match up with the leadership and the makeup of the team that will provide those results for me? So we talked about 3 things, right? We talked about you as a leader, understanding yourself. Number 2, understanding your team. Number 3, what does my team need to do to function? And this makes it more objective as you go through this process. So here's a simple equation for your leadership. You plus others plus work equals your results. And so if we're missing something in this equation, right? If we don't understand the work that we're trying to do, we're not going to get the results that we want. If we don't understand how our team works, we're not going to get the results that we want. If we don't understand ourselves really well, we're not going to drive any of this stuff. And again, we're not going to get the results that we want. So as we go through this, there's a simple way to kind of think about talent optimization in this process. So on one side, you've got business strategy, right? You've got, this is what I'm trying to accomplish as a business. And on the other side, you've got, through that strategy, these are the results that we're trying to get as an organization. And so in that process is some specific areas that we can think about in the talent optimization process. The first one is thinking about, is my organization designed to achieve the results that I want? Now, you can see where this methodology really dovetails nicely with the total experience design methodology that we talk about. Because we talk all the time about, is my organization designed to achieve the results that I want? The same is true in talent optimization. Am I hiring to drive the results that I'm after? So are we hiring in a way that's trying to fill the deficiencies and the gaps that I want to hire for? And once we get them in there, are we inspiring your people to deliver the results that you want? Or, as I was as a leader early on, am I forcing people to be just like me? Which, if you've never tried to do that, please don't, because it's disastrous. And based on my personal experience, it doesn't work that well. And the last thing is diagnostic. Are there issues under the surface that could be impacting our ability to reach our goal? So really looking for, if as we design and we hire and we inspire, really looking at where could we make improvements, where can we help to achieve some of the results that we're looking for. Now, if you think about where you're at as an organization, if you think about what you can do differently to kind of play in this new space, right? We're in a new space of talent that is different than how it's ever looked before. And so I've got people who are really insistent that they hire someone who has experience in the position that they're trying to hire for. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think having that kind of a standard is appropriate. However, you may not find someone who has that kind of experience. Now you got to make a decision. Do I wait? How long do I wait? And if I can't wait, what if I bring someone in who maybe doesn't have the experience, but they have some of the other things that I'm looking for? This is where the talent optimization process really comes in, because it can help you look for the deficiencies in your team and where you could bring someone in who maybe doesn't have the experience, but they've got the right temperament and attitude and way of approaching things that would make them a great asset to your team. So this is huge, because right now, when we have turnover, things like that, that costs money. When we're not intentional with our process, we tend to bring in people that maybe aren't really a very good fit. That costs money. And so these are things that we want to think about in the talent optimization process. And look, here's why this matters now more than ever. And as COVID has kind of hit a lot of our offices and a lot of our work situations, leaders are reporting now that they struggle with their teams pre-COVID now, and it's worse. And so that it was hard before COVID, and now it's even worse. And so 69% of companies restructured their teams during the pandemic. So think about that. 2 out of every 3 companies completely restructured their team dynamic. And so we have people working from home. We have people working in the office and from home in kind of a hybrid situation. We have people who were laid off and never came back. All those things happened, right? And they've got a breakdown here of, what percentage of your company's employees have been laid off or furloughed. Some companies reported 51% or greater. That was 13% of companies said over half of their workforce was furloughed or laid off. Some people laid off a quarter to 50%. Some people 11 to 25. Some people 10% or fewer. 31% of companies actually, which makes up the biggest block here, didn't have to lay anyone off. But even if they didn't lay anyone off, they've still had dynamic changes within their organization that they've had to navigate, that has brought up different cultural needs, has brought up different people that they need to bring into the organization because people left. All these things have happened during COVID, and now as we kind of transition out of a COVID phase, these are going to be things that we still continue to need to think about, know, and understand as we go through this process. So understanding that the dynamics have changed, that we need to do things differently, this is a time to really think about talent optimization in a really in a more robust way. So that's kind of that's predictive index in a nutshell. That's what we're doing with this process overall. And so as you guys go through this and think about this, one of the questions you may have is predictive index for me, is talent optimization for me? And I'll tell you this, it's not for everyone that we work with. In fact, we work with a lot of smaller teams. For those teams that we work with that are smaller, this is not appropriate for them. But if you have a team that is 10 or more people in your organization, this is something that you should take a serious look at. And how you do that is you have your team go through the the behavioral assessment to get a sense for what's the makeup of the team, what are our objectives for our team, like what do we need out of our team, and then what we do is we analyze the makeup of your team with the objectives that you have for your team to see where there can be some real growth in that process to do that. So predictive index isn't for everyone. If you have 2 or 3 people on your team, it's not really worth your while. And the reason why I say that is predictive index costs money. It is an investment for people to make. Now, it's a worthwhile investment for people to make, but at the same time, if you're a smaller team, it's really not appropriate for you. But for those of you who have a team of 10 or more, this is something that I would strongly suggest that you look at. And the way you can do that is just by emailing me. So you can hit me at brandon@newworkrevolution.com. And I am happy to get that process started with you and have you look at that. But hopefully this gave you some things to think about with your own process. Like, how do I understand me better? How do I understand my team better? How do I understand what kind of a team that I need in order to continue to drive the results that I want? What are the questions that we need to ask in that process in order to continue to team build? Because right now, if you don't have a hiring process, if you don't have a process to inspire, if you don't have any intentional processes and systems around that, you are likely getting your butt kicked in hiring. And even if you do have processes, you're likely to have a lot of difficult things happen in the hiring process. That's just something that a lot of my clients are experiencing right now with regards to how they build teams. So that's predictive index in a nutshell. I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to pause here to see if anyone has any questions, and you can drop that in the chat. If you have questions, I'll hang out here for just a couple minutes. If you don't have any questions, then we'll be done here and we'll wrap up today's webinar. So thank you guys, everyone who is in attendance, for being in attendance today. All right. I'm going to assume that we're all good here. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening this week. And I look forward to talking to you guys again next week. Same time, same bat channel. And we'll talk again then soon. Take care and have a great rest of your day.